Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Sudzha direction, where the Russians, according to information we have, launched their major offensive operation. And currently we're talking not about the Russian attempts to attack in the direction of N07 road, the main supply arteria. Currently and this morning we start receiving updates from very reliable pro-Russian sources that this morning on the 8th of March of 2025, the armored groups of Russian army began moving in the direction of the city of Sudzha itself. So everything tells us that maybe today the major battle for the city is going to start, and maybe today is going to be a turning and the breaking point in the battle for this territory, and maybe today the Ukrainians will start retreating towards more reliable positions towards the city of Sumy itself, and maybe today we're going to become witnesses of the ending of the battle for the Kursk direction. Now let's discuss in details everything that we got by the beginning of the 8th of March, and probably this is the most interesting and very important analysis made by several pro-Russian resources who has connections with the soldiers on the ground. In Kursk region, between 4.7 thousand and 6.3 thousand Ukrainian armored forces fighters are surrounded. They have no way out, only a breakthrough is possible, which 15 or 20% of the total force might manage. The blocking them is also impossible. Their only option are to surrender or to die. Electronic warfare has disrupted armored forces of Ukraine communication. Starlinks have been down since Monday. Separate groups fighting in small tactical groups with armored vehicles have independently, without regard for Syrsky, begun negotiations for surrender and evacuation of the wounded in exchange for their lives and new types of US and France supplied weapons. They are ready to hand over new types of drones, satellite encryption systems, electronic warfare equipment, and some armored vehicles. Over 1,000 fighters are ready to surrender right now. There are also 230 seriously wounded who urgently need medical attention. So as you can see, the situation for the Ukrainians is very critical, and furthermore, during the previous night we got the first reports that confirm that Ukrainians fled from the settlement of Male Loknya. It is reported that the Ukrainian armored forces fled from Male Loknya in the Kursk region. The Ukrainian armored forces using the night as a cover are trying to leave the settlement. Over the past few days, the Ukrainian armored forces group have been taken into operational encirclement. All roads are under fire from Russian artillery and controlled by drones. So according to this statement, during the previous night between the 7th and the 8th of March, the Ukrainians several groups of the armored forces of Ukraine made several attempts to break through in the southern directions towards the settlement of Kazachya Loknya. As for pro-Russian resources, they reported that by the end of the 7th of March and by the beginning of the 8th of March, the settlement was surrounded from three sides, and obviously today we're gonna start receiving first videos with the Russian flags on the territory of the settlement itself. The situation for the Ukrainians, as you can see, is very critical. When talking about the Western media, we start receiving lots of different articles that Ukrainian troops in Kursk region almost surrounded. We are talking about thousands of Ukrainian troops. This was a serious blow to Kyiv, which had hoped to use its presence in the region as leverage on Moscow in possible peace talks. That was stated by Reuters. The situation in Ukraine's Kursk region has deteriorated sharply over the past 3 days. Russian forces have recaptured significant territories as a part of an offensive operation that has almost cut the Ukraine group into two and cuts off of the main group from its main supply roads. Another important thing is that the Ukrainians, is the most important, began surrendering. Furthermore, Politico stated that Ukraine considers withdrawing troops from Kursk region under threat of encirclement. You know that as for this, these are just articles, and of course it's up to us to believe them or not, or maybe it's just a way to increase the pressure on Zelensky and Ukrainian side. but during the previous night we got a lot of videos from the same area of how the Russians were FPV droning and attacking the Ukrainian vehicles and soldiers. For example, this is one of the most important video for the previous 24 hours. In this video we can see how the Russian drone attacked the mines and explosives that was established by the Ukrainians below the bridge between the eastern and the central part of the city of Sudzha. As a result of this attack, this bridge was destroyed. So now the Russians are working on Ukrainian logistics, trying to prevent them from retreating. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians launched full-scale offensive operation in the direction of the settlement by the name of Yunakievka. We start receiving first satellite pictures, and in these satellite pictures we have several points of fire anomalies. This is the first point, this is the second one, and here the third one. Furthermore, according to different pro-Russian resources, the Russians managed to improve their positions between the settlement of Novinka and this small salient in the direction of Basovka. Furthermore, as you can see, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor, because this night we start receiving first geolocations that confirm Russian attacks on the direction of Ukraine positions. Here we can see Russian soldiers that were moving in the fields towards the settlement of Basovka. Furthermore, we continue receiving videos of how the Russians were FPV droning and attacking Ukrainian vehicles in the same fields. So the situation for the Ukrainians is very difficult. And I'll remind you that yesterday, during the Russian massive missile strike that took place in the morning of the 7th of March, the Russians attacked this territory. The source reported about massive blows with the Iskanders in this area and that Ukrainians suffered losses. Of course, let's wait and see what is going to be next. We need to understand that maybe this is a part of Russian propaganda and part of Russian attempts to, let's say, increase the pressure on the Ukrainian soldiers on the ground. As for now, we don't have enough of proofs that can give us possibility to make changes on the ground, for example in Sudzha pocket itself, but we believe that during the day we're going to receive some. When talking about the southern part, today we got another video how the Russians destroyed another pontoon bridge that was established by the Ukrainians with the purpose to support forces in this area. So everything tells us that the Russians are going to launch, or maybe have already launched, something very powerful in this area. So let's wait and see, and most likely we're going to receive today a lot of very interesting updates from this territory. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Toretsk and the Chasiv Yar direction. According to information we have, the Russians continue their offensive operation. The Ukrainians, for example, today reported that the yesterday attacks that the Russians carried out in the most northwestern part of the settlement failed from the Russian side. The Ukrainians published lots of videos with losses from the Russian side, but nothing about, let's say, Ukrainian counterattacks. So we believe that also this upcoming day we are going to receive a lots of very important updates from the city of Chasiv Yar with additional changes on the ground. This is another battle that is coming to an end, and most likely the battle for the city is also going to be finished in the Russian favor. Now let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. As for these territories, we have several changes on the ground, and this time we are coloring the territory most likely more in Ukrainian favor than in the Russian favor. Today, several pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of counterattacks that have been taking place probably since the beginning of this week, the Ukrainians managed to establish complete control over the northern part of the city. As for now, we don't have any geolocations that can confirm this, but we understand that Ukrainians will continue their counterattacks. The Russians are saying that they managed to regroup their forces in the southern part of the settlement, and now the Russians began offensive further in the northern direction with the purpose to force Ukrainians to fall back. So basically we see that the battle for Shevchenka has started from the beginning. But I'll remind you that Shevchenka is a very important settlement because the most of logistic goes exactly through this area, and due to the fact that the Russians have problems with this area, we start receiving reports that Ukrainians continue improving their positions in the area between the settlement of Udachne and Kotlina. I'll remind you that yesterday several neutral mappers reported that Ukrainians managed to restore control over the settlement of Udachne completely. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Dnipro direction. Today, the pro-Ukrainian sources published video how they were FPV droning and attacking the Russian soldiers in this area. We will not watch video because there are lots of violence and casualties among soldiers, but I'll remind you that, for example, yesterday the Russians, according to different sources, managed to improve their positions in the northwestern direction from the settlement of Andreevka. So, for example, this is the situation by the end of the 6th of March. So the Russians just secured the settlement of Andreevka. We got this report from the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, and by the end of the 7th of March, the Russians managed to take under control several tree lines in the northwestern direction, and by the beginning of the 8th of March, we see that the Russians managed also improve their positions to the south of Zaporozhye. So summarizing everything, we made the conclusion that currently the main target and the main task of the Russians is to cut this pocket, to cut the salient between the settlements of Andreevka, Novoandreevka, Yasenevo and Zaporozhye. So everything inside of this pocket is the primary target for the Russians for the next several weeks or days, and this is very important offensive operation. The Russians need to improve their logistics, they need to maintain the lines, and the most important, they need to shorten the lines. This will allow the Russians to continue offensive operation further in the western direction with the purpose to outflank the settlement of Alexeyevka and Bogatyr from the north. Now let's discuss the situation in the area of Constantinople. There are very heavy clashes on the territory of this village, and I'll remind you that just several days ago the Russians finished the battle for the settlement of Ulakli, but now we start receiving reports that the Ukrainians, for example, managed to restore control over the southern part of the city, of the village. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 6th of March, and during the 7th of March, during yesterday, we got reports that Ukrainians managed to restore control over this territory, and based on this report, we have adjusted the map in as an air contested area. And today, by the morning of the 8th of March, we got first geolocation that confirmed this. In this video, we can see Ukrainian evacuation vehicle that came to the southern part of Constantinople with the purpose to evacuate Ukrainian soldiers, but the Russians managed to discover the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine, and as a result of precision strike, the vehicle was destroyed. Based on this video, we have temporarily colored this part of the village in Ukrainian favor, and later we got additional report that it is reported that the Russian armored forces have forced Ukrainians to fall back from the settlement completely. Several pro-Russian resources colored the northeastern and the eastern part of the settlement in Russian favor. So summarizing everything, when talking about the current situation without geolocations, the Russians by the beginning of the 8th of March established control for more than 80% of the settlement, and most likely this day the Ukrainians will indeed complete their defense mission in this area, and they will fall back further in the direction of Bogatyr, which means that most likely the settlement of Rozliv would be abandoned by the Ukrainians in the upcoming hours as well. Now let's move further in the direction of Velika Novoselka. There are very heavy clashes, but for the fourth day in a row we haven't received anything from this area. Most likely the Russians managed to reach the next defense belt of the armored forces of Ukraine, and currently the Russians are focused in destroying these defense positions. Most likely after several days of very heavy clashes, artillery and aviation bombardments, the Russians will continue moving further in the direction of the settlement of Shevchenka. As for now, as you can see, there are no changes on the ground. Now let's discuss several political updates that we got during the previous 24 hours and during the previous night. According to information we have, the Donald Trump, the 47th President of the United States of America, made several statements during the previous 12 hours. Putin did not want to start a conflict in Ukraine. I believe him. Everything is fine with Russia and me. It is more difficult for me with Ukraine, and they have no trump cards. The cards are now in Moscow's hand, the US President said. If Ukraine does not want to resolve the conflict, we are leaving there. Trump's threat stressed that Putin is determined to end the war. When asked if he believes that the Russian president after the overnight strike on Ukraine, Trump answered affirmatively. I believe we want to deal with Russia. Although they are bombing the hell out of Ukraine right now, I find it more difficult to deal with Ukraine, frankly, and they have no cards. He is doing whatever anyone else would do, Trump responded to a question about whether Putin is using the halts in the arms supplies to Ukraine to his advantage. Ukraine, like him, European countries have no idea how to end the conflict in Ukraine. Trump responded to whether the US will resume air defense systems amid shelling. I have to know that they want to make a deal. I don't know yet if they do. To unblock military supplies, Ukraine must sign a resource agreement because 350 billion have been spent on them. When talking about this agreement, rare metals agreement, today we got another very important thing, that the United States of America is demanding 100% control over the Ukrainian mineral fund instead of the original 50%. And the United States of America changed their mind after Zelensky decided and refused to sign the mineral deals several days ago. Another important statement about Putin is that without NATO troops, Putin ready for a truce with Ukraine on certain conditions. In particular, Russia will insist on establishing the parameters of a possible peacekeeping mission. Moscow has rejected the participation of the European Union and NATO forces, but does not object to troops from China and other countries neutral to the conflict. So most likely Russia will accept the peacekeeping troopers, but most likely these peacekeeper troopers are going to be from China, maybe India, maybe Brazil, maybe from any other country that is more allied to Russia than anyone else from Europe and especially from the United States of America. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.